and every single one of them, every faint and flickering point up there, is a part of some older, greater story. The whole night sky is a vast and silent tapestry of them, woven together across thousands of years. Tales of heroes and of monsters, of gods and of mortals, of love and of loss and of wonder, all of them hanging quietly above us, waiting to be remembered. Tonight, among all those countless stars, we come to one story in particular, and it is not the story of a great beast, nor of a mighty hero. For if you look carefully among the stars, you will find one shape that stands apart from nearly all the others. Not a lion, not a bull, not an archer, and not a serpent, but a quiet, even, perfectly balanced shape. A set of scales, a balance hanging there in the heavens. It is the only one of its kind in all the wheeling signs of the sky, and it is the story of an idea, one of the oldest and gentlest and most fragile ideas that humankind has ever known, the idea of justice. This is the story of the scales. To understand what those scales truly are and why they hang there among the stars, we must drift back, far back, beyond the age of heroes, beyond even the memory of the oldest tales, to the very first days of the world, to a time when the gods still walked openly upon the earth, side by side with mortals, and the line between the heavens above and the ground below was thin enough to cross. In those distant days, there lived a goddess named Astraea. She was the goddess of justice and of innocence and of all things fair and good and true. Where others among the immortals held dominion over the sea, or the sky, or the harvest, or the hunt, Astraea's care was for something quieter and in its way more delicate than any of those. Hers was the keeping of what is right, and wherever she walked, she carried with her a single precious thing, a set of golden scales, a balance. Now, a set of scales is a simple thing to look upon, two pans, hanging level from a single beam. But consider, for a moment, what it truly means. For a balance does not judge in anger, and it does not judge in haste. It does not care who stands before it, rich or poor, mighty or humble, beloved or despised. It simply weighs. It takes the one thing, and it takes the other, and it holds them against each other, patiently and without any passion at all, until the truth of them becomes plain. The good against the wrong, the kindness against the cruelty, the honest word against the lie. That in the end is what justice truly is, not vengeance and not cruelty and not the anger of the powerful, but balance, the careful, patient weighing of one thing against another until what is fair becomes clear to all. And that balance, that quiet gift of measuring all things truly, was what Astraea carried in her hands and offered freely to the whole of the world. And for a long and gentle age, the world had need of very little else. For those first days were the days that would come to be remembered ever after as the Golden Age. It is difficult now to truly imagine such a time, but the old stories speak of it with a kind of longing, as though it were a dream half remembered upon waking. In the Golden Age, they tell us, humanity lived in perfect peace and perfect harmony with one another and with the world itself. There was no war anywhere upon the earth. There was no cruelty and no greed and no envy and no deceit. No walls were built, for there were no enemies to be feared. No locks were set upon any door, for there were no thieves to guard against. And most remarkable of all, there were no laws written down anywhere in all the world, and no judges appointed to enforce them, because none were ever needed. The people of that age were simply good to one another, not out of any fear of punishment, and not because they had ever been commanded to be, but freely and naturally and of their own hearts. They did what was right without ever having to be told what right was. They shared what they had. They kept their word. They cared for one another and for the stranger at the door as easily as they breathed, and the earth itself seemed to love them for it, giving up its fruit freely and without labor, so that no one anywhere wanted for anything at all. It was said to be a season of endless gentle spring, where the flowers never faded and the harvests never failed, and the very air was soft and warm and kind. And through that bright and peaceful world, the goddess of justice walked openly, welcome in every home she passed. She was not feared as a judge is feared. She was loved as a dear friend is loved. And her golden scales, the balance she carried with her everywhere, hung quiet and still and perfectly level. For there was nothing in all that gentle age that was ever out of balance. There was nothing that needed to be weighed, because there was nothing that was unfair. The scales of justice rested easy in a world that was already just, and Astraea was content to remain there among a people who had no true need of her at all. But no age lasts forever, not even the golden ones, perhaps especially not the golden ones. And so slowly at first that no one could ever have named the day that it began, the world started to change. It was a small thing in the beginning, a hardness that crept quietly into the hearts of the people, a first faint flicker of wanting, of looking upon what belonged to another, and wishing secretly that it were one's own. The endless spring began to falter, and for the first time the world came to know harsh and biting seasons, the deep cold of winter and the scorching heat of summer, so that now men had to labor and to store and to struggle, where once the earth had simply given. And with that struggle came the first of the quarrels, the first sharp and bitter words, the first small cruelties that once would have been unthinkable. Bit by bit, the goodness went out of them. The sharing gave way to keeping. The keeping gave way, in time, to taking. The kindness that had once come so naturally began, slowly, to be forgotten, as though it were a language falling gradually out of use, until fewer and fewer could still remember how to speak it. And at last, and this perhaps was the saddest turning of them all, the people learned to make weapons. And having made them, they learned soon enough to turn those weapons against one another. And as humanity fell, the gods began to leave. One by one and quietly, the immortals who had once walked so freely among mortals withdrew from the world of the earth. They drew back and up and away into the high and distant heavens, turning from a world that no longer honored them, no longer welcomed them, no longer seemed to have any place for them at all. The earth, which had once been shared so easily between gods and mortals alike, was slowly given over to mortals alone, and the sky, high above, grew quietly crowded with departing gods. But not Astraea, for the goddess of justice loved humankind, loved them perhaps more deeply than any other immortal ever had, and love does not leave so easily as that. She could not bring herself to abandon them. And so, as one god after another rose up and departed, Astraea alone remained behind, the very last of all the immortals to stay upon the earth. She did not stay as she once had, though. The world had grown far too harsh for that. She withdrew from the great halls and the crowded places of men, and went instead to the quiet edges of things, to the lonely hills and the still and silent valleys, and the wild places at the margins of the world where the old peace still lingered, faint and fading. She appeared to mortals less and less often now, a figure half glimpsed at the edge of the fields, a presence felt more than seen, but still, she stayed, lingering, watching, waiting. For she was waiting all that long while upon a single thing. She was hoping against all the plain evidence of her own eyes, that the people might yet remember themselves, that they might one day pause and truly look at what they had become and turn back from the road they were walking. She believed, or she wished to believe, that the goodness was not gone from them entirely, but only sleeping, and that it might somehow one day wake again. And so alone, the last god upon a slowly darkening earth, Astraea kept her long and patient vigil, and she held her golden scales close, and she hoped, but they did not turn back. Instead, the world sank down at the very last into its final and its darkest age of all, the age that the old stories call the Iron Age. And in that age, every last thing that had once held the world together came undone. Truth fled, and honesty fled, and faith and loyalty fled along with them. and in the empty places where they had been, there came instead fraud and violence and deceit and greed without any end at all. The bonds that tie people to one another, guest to host and friend to friend, and brother to brother and child to parent, all of them frayed and strained and snapped and fell away. Hands that had once been gentle were stained now with blood. There was no honor left anywhere in the world, and no shame and no fairness to be found in all the wide and weary earth. And the goddess of justice looked upon it all. She had waited so very long. She had hoped so much, and for so many years. She had stayed when every other immortal had already gone, holding fast to her belief that the light within humankind had not truly died out, but only dimmed. But in the world of the Iron Age, there was simply, at the last, no longer any place for her. A goddess of justice cannot dwell where there is no justice left to keep. A balance cannot come to rest where nothing at all will hold still to be weighed. And so, at the very end, with a sorrow deeper than any words could ever hold, Astraea too let go. She rose up slowly from the corrupted earth, the final immortal ever to leave it, the last light of the old and gentle world lifting quietly away from the ground, and she ascended up and up into the vast and waiting heavens. She left the world of mortals behind her, and with her going, the last of all the gods departed from the earth, and an entire age of the world came softly and sorrowfully to its close. But, and here at last the long sorrow of the story begins to lift, she was not lost. For Zeus, the king of the gods, looked upon the goddess of justice as she rose grieving into the sky, and he would not allow her greatness, or her goodness, or her long and faithful love for humankind to simply vanish into the dark and be forgotten. And so he gave to her a place of the very highest honor, high among the stars, a place where she might shine, undimmed for all time, and where, from that great and silent height, she might look down forever upon the world that she had loved and lost and left behind. And there she became a constellation, the graceful figure of a maiden stretched wide and gentle across the heavens, the one that we know to this very night as Virgo, the maiden. And yet, the story does not quite end with the goddess herself, for there was one thing more, one last quiet thing, and it is perhaps the most beautiful part of the whole long tale, the scales, her golden balance, the instrument of justice that she had carried faithfully through every single age of the world, from the first bright morning of the Golden Age to the last bitter dusk of the Iron, was not left behind upon the abandoned earth. It was not forgotten in the ruin of the world that she had left. Instead, in a moment as quiet and as gentle as anything in all the old stories, the scales were lifted too. Imagine it for a moment. The goddess is already gone, risen into the sky, set among the stars as the maiden, and rising slowly after her now, drawn gently up out of a darkened and joyless world and into the vast and silent heavens, come her scales, the two golden pans, the single level beam. Up they rise through the deep of the night, higher and higher and higher, past the last reach of the corrupted earth, and into the boundless quiet of the stars. And there, softly and without a single sound, they come at last to rest. They settle into a place all their own in the great dark sky, just beside the maiden who had carried them so faithfully and for so long. And then, one by one, they begin to shine, points of pale starlight, kindling in the perfect shape of a balance, coming gently, quietly alight in the darkness. And in that still and wordless moment, the scales of justice became a constellation in their own right. Libra, the scales, set there forever in the heavens, level and even and perfectly balanced, exactly as they had once hung in the goddess's own two hands, in the gentle and long-vanished days when the whole world was young. And why? Why lift the scales at all, when the goddess who had held them was already safe among the stars? Perhaps for this single reason, so that justice itself would not leave the world entirely, even after the goddess of justice had gone. For though Astraea had departed, though the last of the gods had risen from the earth, and the long age of gods and mortals walking together had ended forever, her scales remained, above it all, hanging quiet and level and steady in the night sky for anyone below to lift their eyes and see. And in that, there has always been something that feels, to those who understand it, like a kind of mercy, a promise written out in the stars themselves, a promise that fairness and balance and the patient weighing of what is right endure, as an ideal, as a memory, as a hope, even in the very darkest of ages, even in a world that has forgotten them entirely, that somewhere, high above all the quarrels and the cruelties of the earth, all deeds are still, in some quiet and unseen way, being weighed, and that the balance, once it was lifted into the heavens, has never once fallen. And the old stories tell us one thing more, the last faint flickering hope in all the long tale. For they say that Astraea did not truly leave the world forever. They say that she is only waiting, as once, long ago, she waited upon the darkening earth, and that one day, if humankind should ever grow worthy of her again, if the world should ever turn back at last toward the goodness that it knew in the very beginning, then the goddess of justice will come down from among the stars once more. And when she does, they say, the golden age itself will return along with her, and her scales will hang easy and level again in a world that has no more need of them. Until that day, she watches from her place in the heavens, and her balance keeps its quiet place and its silent promise in the sky above us all. So when you look up on some clear and quiet night, and you find that even, level shape among the stars, two balanced points of light holding steady and calm just beside the gentle figure of the maiden, you will know now exactly what it is that you are seeing. Not a beast and not a hero, but the scales of justice themselves, the balance that the last of all the gods carried through every age of the world and would not leave behind her and would not let the world forget. Remember, when you find them, what those scales were truly made to do, to weigh all things fairly and without anger and without haste, to hold the good and the ill in perfect patient balance, and to remind us quietly from high above of the kind of world that we once were in the beginning, and of the kind of world that we might one day still choose to become again. Rest now and let the stars keep watch. For the whole of the night, sky is full of stories just like this one, countless of them, hanging quietly above us in the dark, each and every one waiting patiently to be remembered once more. And every single one of them is a tale for another night. New stories every week, hidden stories of the stars.